Timer here.
What's going on, guys? We're going to get started with our show in just a quick second. Interesting conversation. I'm going to... There we go.
You ready? I'm ready.
Okay, I'm ready when you are.
All right. Give me a mic check, please.
Mic check, mic check. Mic check, 1 2 1 2.
I'm not hearing here. I have a mic on. I should not have. All right.
Hey, guys. How's it going out there in social media land?
Stand by.
All right.
Darn it.
What's that?
I'll set my timer again. There we go.
Hello, this is Kareem Bowen, and you've tuned in to another edition of United Shades of Gray. I'm so glad that you guys have come in to just have this important conversation with us once again. We've had an amazing time, an amazing journey together, talking about issues of great importance. So today we're going to continue that conversation, and we're going to talk about the trial of Derek Chauvin, which you guys all know is the trial, the murder trial for George Floyd. Many of you have said, hey, it's a George Floyd trial. And, my producer is very keen on making sure that we say that this is George Floyd is not on trial. And I think that it's very important for us to be reminded of as we go through this particular situation. This is a great point in America. When we look at the situation, so many great things have the potential to come out of this. And we're hoping that we end up on the right side of history for the first time in a long time. I want to give a shout out to my main man, the Rob Father. He's in here with us on today. Rob, why don't you give a shout out to the USG family?
What's up, USG family? Rob Father here. Happy to be here. And welcome to another edition of United Shades of Gray, Kareem.
Okay, so when we say USG, we're talking about United Shades of Gray. So that's what USG stands for. So we're glad that you guys have tuned in today. I want to get directly in to the scope of our program on today because there is so much to cover, a lot that we must talk about, and a lot that I'm interested in hearing your perspectives and your viewpoints concerning. So first of all, I want to start what's hot off the press today. Well, U.S. Congressman Matt, I think it's Gates, a Florida representative, Republican, actually, he's U.S. Congressman from Florida, Republican, was he was literally the only individual in 2017. If you guys remember, there was a bipartisan anti-sex trafficking bill that was presented. He was the only one that voted no. Someone might ask, why would you vote no on that type of thing? Well, there has been an allegation, and this is alleged, that he has had a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old girl, which also violates laws against sex trafficking in the process. So we're kind of interested in finding out what's going on. I'll tell you, it doesn't matter whether you're Republican or Democrat or other or the Green Party or the Tea Party. One thing that we should not lean to our public officials for our laws on morality, because we see that regardless of party affiliation, everyone seems to fall short when it comes to the area of morality. We are all just mere men, and so just as I say with pastors, we respect and we have a respect. I think pastors are a little bit different. There should be an element of respect and an expectation of greater, but they are men and we are men, and so we fall. And so I think that it's important that we take another look and just make sure that we really begin. Back in the day, there was this understanding that morality was a part of what it meant to be in leadership. We've lost that. Hopefully one day that'll become something. You know how they say things go around and they return. I can't wait for the day, as Denzel Washington said, I can't wait for the day for morality and respect to be in vogue again. But this isn't his first time that he's been accused of sexual misconduct. As a matter of fact, last year, Chris Latava accused Latvala, I think it's Latvala, accused a congressman of designing a game with a point system. One set of points for sleeping with an aide, another interns, lobbyists, and then married legislators. And the game was first reported by the Miami Herald. So there is a history there that needs to be taken a look into. Next, Sharon Osbourne. We've talked about this a couple of times here on United Shades of Gray. The entire play out of Sharon on, I think she's on The Talk, and her interactions and how she just kind of flipped the lid because she felt that they were calling her racist. And I've seen this happen so many times, Rob. I always tell people that it seems like we live in a country that people are more afraid to be called racist than actually have racist tactics and practices in place.
And if you call it racist and you feel you're not, then that's a learning point for you, because then you can learn from somebody.
Why do you call? What is it that I've done
that may be perceived as racist?
That is an excellent point. What is it that I have done that you would call racist, and how can I not? If this is racist, how should I better handle the situation? That's what an individual who truly wants to learn, who wants to lean in and grow from it. And I think that everything is a learning opportunity. So when we look at this, I think it's important for us to take into consideration that, hey, there's always another way other than being angry. I gave my producer the idea of a book that he needed to read. And he came in today. It's titled White Fragility. And those of you who are out there, let me see that book really quick. And those of you who are out there listening, those of you who are watching on social media, I'll just give you a quick pic of what it looks like. Just let me see the cover real quick. He keeps his books nicely and beautiful. He puts covers on them. But if you look at it, the name or the title of the book is White Fragility. For those of you who are out there, and it's an amazing book by Robin DiAngelo and a foreword by Michael Eric Dyson. Michael is a poignant. He is powerful. And I would say those of you who are out there, listen, read it, and let's learn. Let's learn from these opportunities in life that we have. So anyway, Sharon, she's decided to leave. The show has been on hiatus ever since this episode has taken place.
She did not just get pressure from CBS. Well, admitted that their production team did not train their staff, for this kind of interaction.
Right. And so, who really is in life? Certain things in life you just kind of have to learn. And one of the things my grandmother used to always said is that, silence is attributed to you as wisdom. I think the good book also says that, Rob. So sometimes you need to just be quiet in areas.
That's a practice of mine without the good book or whatever. Something that I do. I choose not to argue certain things, and I notice that being silent is more powerful. For me, it says a whole lot without saying anything.
Absolutely. And so I said, I would always say, hey, those of you tuning in, good to see you this evening. But I would always say that things that I don't know about, I just shut up about it. And if you don't understand what it means to be racist, or if you hear something and someone says it's something, don't come to the defense. Listen, ask the question, what does it mean? And she did it after she blew up. Like, show me how, but then she just couldn't let it go. But anyway, she's decided to take a walk, is what they're saying. Now, whether it was forced, but the fact of the matter, because I don't like the way it happened, Rob, because what they did is they took everyone off the air. Dealing with the issue. And I guess it's because they were trying to figure out whether or not production was involved, or, she said she was set up. And so since she was a woman that was crying, and typically a crying white woman will usually get the attention of the producers, they took a step aside and they've taken everyone off the air. And I think their return date is coming up. Yeah. April the 12th is the return date. But she's not walking away. She's getting a hefty payout. I think it's something to the tune of $10 million. I mean, so whatever the lesson is learned, I'm struggling to understand. I'm not sure. I don't know. There is no reparations that will be taking place for sure at this particular place. But I think that it's important for us to realize that we all have a responsibility and a role to play as we combat racism in our country.
But you know what the beauty about this whole thing is, Kareem?
What's that?
Shows like this and incidents like that on the talk, I'm happy it brings awareness, because for too long, you know, racism has been just spoken in whispers. That's the only silver lining about the Trump administration. Certain things came out of the woodwork, and now we can talk about it openly. You know, it's no longer in the shadows, and I don't want to talk about this. I don't want to call this guys. We need to talk about this information here and make people aware. That was, oh, I did not realize I was feeling this. And black people too. Black people, Asian people, we all have some kind of racist thread in our body for some reason, until we realize that okay, this is wrong. I need to learn from this and learn how to treat my fellow man and woman as the persons and human beings that they are.
Well, I think that we all have racial bias. I think that that is something that I would agree to from what you said, Rob. I think that we all have the ability to have racial bias, right, and we all have the ability to be prejudiced. Right. So we all come into the world and we have some prejudices and some biases that are based upon maybe our experiences, our upbringing, our heritage, our surrounding. Our environment is so key to understanding those and really making a difference in how we move forward. But even with that information, we still have a responsibility. I think that the moment we stop evolving is the moment we begin to die. And so as we evolve as adults and humans, we have to make a concerted effort, a real effort, to make sure that we empower, that we engage, and that we inform ourselves so that we don't remain the same person. You know, who I am today is so different than who I was a year ago. And as I look at myself, you know, 10 years younger, and I look at myself now, sometimes I laugh at the person I used to be and the things that I thought I knew and the understanding I thought that I had, because it was not well informed. And so as we grow, we should not only grow in size, but we should also grow in understanding.
Right. And become wiser that way, and you're
absolutely.
A better person.
Absolutely. And so understanding, and that's the key. You know, this is why we have these conversations, because understanding, when we come to an understanding in everything that we get, we should always try to get an understanding of where we are. And that builds a process or a platform for us to have continued growth in our life. Continuing. Okay. So I want to be done with that, because I really want to get to the conversation that is at hand today. And that is the conversation that I want to have today about the Derek Chauvin trial. We know the judge of this trial is Judge Peter Cahill, and Derek Chauvin is the former Minneapolis police officer who is being charged with the murder of George Floyd. He faces, I think, 3 major charges: second-degree unintentional murder, second-degree manslaughter, and third-degree murder, which was instituted. It was removed, but then instituted again for George Floyd's death back in 2020. And, you know, I've kind of been glued to what's going on. I would be at home watching it when it's on at home. I'm watching it at home on TV. When I leave the house, I'm putting it on my phone, downloading news apps so that I can watch the trial.
I'm listening to it on the radio, too.
Are you listening to it on the radio?
And a lot of it's depressing. A lot of it makes me angry. A lot of it is just, it's just sad.
Well, you know what? I'm watching with anticipation.
I'm talking about Derek Chauvin. I'm talking about the witnesses themselves who have to recount this whole thing.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely.
I listened to that teenager the other day.
And that was interesting. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, because I think that what we have failed, and when I was listening to that teenager, one of the things that I realized is that we haven't talked about the trauma that's associated in great detail, the trauma that exists from us dealing with the aftermath of this. And we're not just talking about that a man was brutally murdered, and that's what it was. It was murdered in broad daylight in front of all those people. But we're also talking about the impact, the lasting impact of the images. So many of us, most Americans, have seen the videotape. Those who have been able to stomach it have sat and watched, but there's been many people who just say, you know, I can't watch this because they've heard about it. But being able to see that and just dealing with the issues and the burden of, you know, dealing with police officers and law enforcement and just everything that has happened since then, and how blacks are labeled in America. And that's why the events that took place this year with the insurrection were so important, because we saw how we are viewed as a people. A group of angry white folks with weapons and guns and breaking windows and beating up police officers are good people, whereas black people who are marching hand in hand peacefully and walking down the streets are seen as rebels or rioters. And so it is a very difficult time in America, but I think it's a place where we can either grow and catapult ourselves forward, or we can be challenged and fail and fall back into the things that we've done. So let's give a brief recap of everything that happened, so that maybe you haven't heard, or maybe you've been disinterested or just unavailable to hear what has taken place. We're going to give you a brief recap of what took place from May 25th up until today, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the trial, and then I want to get some perspective and some insight and just have some real meaningful conversation as it relates to what is going on. All right, so May 25th of last year, Floyd, who was 46 years old. Now, this is the thing that's interesting, and this is my personal connection to George Floyd. George was a good friend of NBA athlete Steve Jackson. And Steve Jackson and I met Steve Jackson, wow, back in 2000. He was playing with the Golden State Warriors. It was actually 2001, I think it was, when he was drafted. When he was playing with the Golden State Warriors, I was working with Jason Richardson, NBA athlete at that time. So I spent a lot of time around Steve Jackson and his entire family. And Steve Jackson was an old school. He was an old school guy, good guy. And the thing that is so crazy is that when you see Steve and you see George, they look so much alike. There's been so many pictures. Someone said that George, they thought that, conspiracy theorists, that George had faked his own death, and they were showing the pictures. Here he is with his daughter on his shoulders. I'm like, no, that's Steve Jackson. But if those of you who don't know who Steve Jackson is, you can catch Steve Jackson. He has a podcast. He and Matt Barnes, formerly of the Los Angeles Lakers and the Golden State Warriors, titled All the Smoke. It is probably, I think it's the best podcast that I have seen out as it relates to athletes and current events. But so that is the connection. So Steve Jackson and George Floyd were great friends, both of them from that Texas area. Steve Jackson got his hair cut by my great uncle Norman Bowen in Texas, in Port Arthur, Texas, as a little kid growing up. And so when we saw them out in Oakland, he was like, "Hey, I know this guy. I cut his hair since he was a little kid." So he and George were great friends. As a matter of fact, he has been really attributed to making sure that the noise of this event did not die out, and he's been very vocal, and he's done a number of interviews. I was so glad to see him on CNN talking about these issues and really standing up for justice and police reform. So anyways, May 25th, that was just my little soapbox moment. May 25th, George Floyd, 46-year-old, died after pleading, "Mama, I can't breathe." He was being kneeled on his neck by Officer Chauvin. And we saw that horrific 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Leading up to the beginning of the trial, I think it was on Sunday morning, they had all of the individuals, the players that were going, all of the attorneys for the Floyd case, both the civil and the criminal case, and Al Sharpton was there, and then the NAN worker, what is it, the Now Action Network, or National Action Network, and they were there, and they did, all of them had a moment, and they spoke for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. But then they took a knee for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and they counted it off. And, when we think about it, 8 minutes and 46 seconds doesn't seem like a lot of time in terms of the span of life. But if we were to take 8 minutes and 46 seconds, and we took that period of time and went silent on the radio for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, people would think that something was wrong, because that is a long period of time. And to think about that period of time being with a man having someone's knee on their neck is absolutely horrific. We did that also here in the March in Saginaw. We kneeled down, and we just, every minute we counted off, we just said, "Hey, I can't breathe." We all would shout it out. And it was 200-300 black men on there taking one knee, just recounting that moment. And it is hard to fathom that someone could not think that they were doing something that was destructive, or even deadly for that period of time.
Put your body weight down on the knee of someone's neck. The neck is a very vital part, for survival.
Yeah, and many of them were struggling to even stay on the one knee for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. So that happened on May 25th. On the 26th, it was announced that 4 police officers, in addition, that were a part of this, were going to be fired, that were involved with this particular situation. Excuse me. That was a tongue twister. May 27th, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz signed an executive order activating the Minnesota National Guard. Protests emerged. It was horrific. I always say that a riot is a tantrum of the soul. There is only so long you can push a cat into the corner. It can be the biggest dog of all. You continue to push that cat into the corner, you're going to really see that cat is just a baby lion, and he is going to roar. And so that's what we saw. Also on May 27th, surveillance video from one of the Minneapolis restaurants was released and appears to contradict the claims, because initially when this happened, if you remember, Rob, they were saying that he was resisting arrest. And so when they finally released the tape, and they saw that there was no resisting arrest, as a matter of fact, he obeyed every single command, there was great outrage that took place across the country. But this points to something that I think is very important, because that resisting arrest, we see that happen all of the time. The officers will often say it, especially in cases with African-American men, but this happens in many cases where police are involved. They will use that phrasing, well, he resisted. What is resisting arrest exactly?
Sometimes it depends on whoever officer's perception is. You could just ask a question. Oh, you resisting arrest.
Exactly.
Or you struggle because you're getting handcuffs put on, just a little bit, because it's not natural for the arms to be put in back, to be held that way. You're resisting arrest. So
absolutely.
What the perception of the officer is.
And so we see those types of things being used all the time. That it's almost like, if I can't get here, then we'll say, hey, he resisted arrest. And so that was exactly what took place. When the video came out, there was no way that could be the case. There was outrage. Several buildings were damaged. Minneapolis police came in. Chauvin was arrested and charged on May 29th of last year. It's nearly been a year. It's ridiculous how long we say a speedy trial, but it's been a year. Well, COVID also hit. We were in the middle of a pandemic.
That's about 3 or 4 weeks, or 4 weeks at least. That's what they're talking about.
Absolutely. So that happened on May the 29th. June 3rd, we moved forward. Minnesota.
25th.
The 29th. June 3rd, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison announced charges of aiding and abetting second-degree murder for the 3 previous uncharged individuals. July 15th, Floyd's family filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against the city of Minneapolis and the police officers involved in his death. Full steam ahead to October 21st, a Hennepin County judge drops a third-degree charge. They dropped a third-degree charge. However, there was a fight to put it back in, which it was later reinstated. And I'll tell you, the reason why that's so important is because so often, if there's, the jury says, we don't agree to this degree, and you don't have something else, they'll often get off the hook. So March 12th happens. Minneapolis City Council unanimously voted to approve a $27 million settlement to the Floyd family. And I'll tell you, it's been interesting, because what I've seen is not only has this has impacted everyone around the world. And it's been so great to see athletes and entertainers and everyone rally around this point. And people are, many people are saying, what's the big deal? George Floyd, he was on drugs. And we're going to talk about this, Rob, when we get on the other side of this first break here. He was on drugs. He was, not a model citizen. Why is this such a big deal? Because in many ways, George Floyd represents all of us. Regardless of what happens, you can have a bad day, you can have a bad moment. If you're not dressed in a suit, then you are George Floyd. And I was talking with athletes, and they were saying, we get celebrated while we're on the court and we're playing. We're celebrated and cheering, and people want our autographs, and people want to be around us. But the moment that we step off the court and we put on our hoodies and our sweatshirts, not being thugs, but just being everyday people, we are now seen as, victims, not victims, but criminals. And we are seen differently. We are feared where we were once reverenced. And so I think it's important for us to have that conversation. I want you to know that if convicted, Chauvin would face up to 40 years in prison for second-degree murder. up to 25 years for third-degree murder, and up to 10 years for second-degree manslaughter. These charges can be separated, but he can be convicted of all of these. So the jurors have an amazing task on hand while the entire world watches to see if for the first time we see the kind of justice that is necessary for Black men, Black America to be able to embrace finally, after seeing so many horrific cases like Breonna Taylor, Trayvon Martin, and the list goes on, Ahmaud Arbery, all of the different things where it seems as though Black lives are not, that don't have value. And I think that's what's so important. People talk about Black Lives Matter. I don't support Black Lives Matter. I support the premise that Black lives have value. And that's the important thing right here. It's not about a particular theme. I know there's a lot about Black Lives Matter that many don't agree with, that I don't agree with. But what I do agree with is the premise that Black lives have value. I want you all to lean in, because when we come back on the other side of this commercial break, we're going to have a more in-depth conversation, look at someone that the witnesses are saying, and then I want to take a historical perspective on what this means and why this is so important that America gets this thing right. All right, we're going to start off and we'll talk about our trial witnesses, and we'll get through them, and we'll have some more dynamic conversations. Stay tuned for more of United Shades of Gray. All right, we getting phone calls here? Is that what's happening?
What's that now?
Was that the phone?
This should not be ringing.
Oh, shoot.
That's my arm.
Oh, okay. All right. All right. So we're going to stay tuned, guys. Stay tuned. We're going to go through these witness statements for the beginning of the trial. I think we've had seven about right now, but we're going to just hit a few of those ones that I think that are key to establishing what's going on. I've watched up to today when we saw the young man, Chris Martin, talking. He was the young man that served George when he was buying a pack of smokes, cigarettes. And so we're going to talk about those witnesses, and then we're going to talk about the historical perspective that is at hand, why Blacks are struggling with the results of this, and are so on edge about what may take place, and why America needs to realize that the gig is up. It's time for a change. It's time for us to really begin to hold accountability for those who kill and think that Black lives are irrelevant. So you guys stay tuned. We're going to be right back in session. We're taking a quick commercial break.
You said May 29th. What happened on May 29th? Troy died on May 25th.
Yeah, no.
The 25th earlier, then you said 29th. That's why I questioned.
Yeah, no, I was just going through. On May 29th, that's when Chauvin was arrested.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. Stay tuned. Y'all stick in there with me out there. What's going on? I would love to hear your perspectives. If somebody's out there would like to come, I'm going to throw out there. Y'all can give us a holler and let us know your perspective of what's going on out there. I would love to have you guys conversing with us. Let me see real quick. All right. 776-6517. All right. Here we go.
Right, there's part two.
Yep. Whenever you're ready, I'm ready. All right, this is Kareem Bowen, your host of United Shades of Gray. We are back. And right before the commercial break, I was sharing with you guys a timeline as it related to the Chauvin trial, the Derek Chauvin trial for the murder of George Floyd. And I gave you guys some dates and some timelines. And most of you that are watching, the world is watching. We are about 3 days in. This is the third day of testimony that we have seen. And I want us to get to here's just a little bit of the conversation. Here's what we know about the jury. And I think that this is important because these will be the individuals that will be deciding what justice looks like in America as it relates to this particular situation. We have 5 men, 9 women. Were chosen to serve during this particular trial, which is which is being held in Minneapolis. 14 jurors, 8 are white, 4 are black, and 2 are biracial. I hate when they use that term mixed race, but 2 are biracial. And the jury selection began March 9th. And I told you, Hennepin County Government Center, which is in Minneapolis. The panel is made up of 12 jurors. We have 2 alternates that will be taking place. The judge is Judge Peter Cahill. And the makeup of this particular demographics of Hennepin County is that they are 74% white, 14% black. And that is kind of consistent with the makeup of America. It's very close to a diverse population of America. And these prospective jurors previously conceded they had them complete a 16-page questionnaire that asked for their potential thoughts about Black Lives Matter. Just trying to figure out where they were. Had they seen the George Floyd? Can they be impartial? Do they have biases as it relates to Black men, to police officers? All the things that you would ask a jury when you're preparing to seat them for a major case. So I want to begin to just really quick to take a look at some of these witnesses. Most of them, 6 of them, I think, were bystanders that testified on the second day of this particular trial. I want to take a look at the witness, Darnella Frazier. By now, many of you don't know who she is. She has been practically unnamed and unknown, but she is an 18-year-old woman. She was 17 at the time, but she is the video that most of us are seeing from the street that was done by a passerby. She is the one who recorded the infamous video showing the death of George Floyd. And she offered an emotional testimony on Tuesday as she was looking at this. She told the prosecutors that when she looked at this, she saw her Black relatives. When she saw George Floyd being, harassed and being, murdered in that particular situation, she saw her relatives. She saw her father. She saw her cousin. She saw other Black men that she was connected to. Rob, can you imagine? And I think that's what we all saw when we saw this.
And not just that, but with that too, but every Black male that is killed at the hands of a police officer, I'm justified. I think of my son because he's not with me, and these are things I taught him from as a young child. You're handsome, you're smart, whatnot, but people do not know that when they see you. So behave yourself the way you're supposed to in society because they're going to see your skin color first. They'll see you're a Black male. And I have to say it, this is just me personally saying this, in my viewpoint as a Black male, America is intimidated by Black men. Light skin, dark skin, you name it, they're intimidated by us. And I don't know why that is. And we're trying to shake that off. That's why this conversation on this show is so important.
Man, right. What's funny is that I'm an educated Black man. That's my MO, right? That's where I am, and I believe that we have someone calling in, Rob. I know that I put the number out there, so we may have someone that's calling in regarding the show. Okay, cool. All right, so if you're going to call here, the number is 989-776-6517. So I'm not sure if we have somebody that may be out there watching and calling the radio station because that's what's going on, but that's the number that you need to call if you want to get in on this conversation. But what I was going to say is that I have a number of friends because even though I am, I think I'm a mild-mannered person. I really am a loving person. I am very direct.
Laid back,
yeah, I'm very direct, and I think sometimes people struggle with, individuals who are very direct. I don't mince my words. My mother often calls me an activist, and she's like, "Oh Lord, my son's an activist." But I am one who believes that you have to stand up for your rights, or your rights will be taken away. And so I often said that if I were there, I probably would either have been dead or arrested, because that's the kind of person that I am. But one thing my friends told me, I had a friend that told me the other day, like, Kareem, you are so ghetto. I'm like, what do you mean I'm ghetto? They're like, you are hood. I'm like, I am not hood. I prefer the term, as my dear friend Angela Rye, who used to be the former president of the Congressional Black Caucus. She is sophistic ratchet. So I am a very sophisticated individual.
You're sophisticated ratchet.
Sophistic ratchet is the term.
Okay.
It's the name of her blog. You check her out,
okay.
Angela Rye, Sophistic Ratchet. But I look at it and I'm very sophisticated. I can talk with anybody from the streets, but I can also sit in the boardrooms.
The same way. Being from Philadelphia, people say, well, you can't be from Philadelphia. You're too educated. You talk too properly, whatnot. But I have a way I can switch what we call code
switching.
Right.
Yeah,
I can do that easily because I was raised in the hoods of Philadelphia, West Philadelphia. And then, my family raised me in such a way, and I went to certain schools, and I brought myself to talk or carry myself a certain way because I knew which thing would open doors and which one would keep me out of certain areas.
Well, yeah, I'm just kind of myself these days. But Darnella Frazier, she's now 18 years old. She's a young woman. She said that she saw her cousin. She said this. She said, when I look at George Floyd, I look at my dad. I look at my brothers. I look at my cousins, my uncles. She said that she stayed up so many nights apologizing to George Floyd in her mind for not doing more to not physically interact to help save his life. And she then went on to say that it isn't about what she should have done, but it is what Chauvin should have done. And when I heard that testimony, I thought that was very powerful. I want to get to these other witnesses. Another witness is Genevieve Hanson, and I thought her perspective was really good. She was an off-duty firefighter who has been a trained EMT from Minneapolis, and she recorded herself on her cell phone approaching the situation. And in the cell phone conversation, she is heard telling the officers to check his pulse because she didn't see any of them doing so when he was saying that he could not breathe. And then she went on. She called 911 after the situation. She said she should have called immediately. And she said that she didn't call because she was in disbelief and she felt helpless. And so they asked her the question, why did you feel helpless? And she said, because there was a man being killed. She used the term killed. There was a man being killed, and she would have called and would have helped, but she didn't have access to be able to help him. And this man who should have been given the most humane support, medical attention to the best of their abilities was denied that right. And so I thought that was powerful. I want to also interject. We're going to throw this out there, and then I want to continue when I have a conversation about this testimony, because I think these things are very important because many of us can relate to this. The 911 dispatcher, her name was Jenna Lee Scurry, Miss Scurry, I think it was. She was the 911 dispatcher. She happened to be off on her day off, and she said she had to call the police on the police. She was going to Cup Foods, and that's where he was. All of this started at Cup Foods store. Mm-hmm. Most of us are familiar with the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that took place. The entire video was 9 minutes and 929. But they now have been looking at the video. They've showed the video inside the store. And I thought it was interesting that the prosecution, when they were putting up the video, they were showing him inside it. And it was funny because I saw him dancing. He looked like a guy that had probably was on hit a lick, and he was probably still high because he looked like he might have been impaired, kind of dancing around, things of that nature. But he was mild-mannered. He was not aggressive. No one ran from him. They transacted business with him. And so as they went through this entire thing, she saw him with the knee on the neck. She thought it was wrong. She called in to 911. She called the police on the police. And she used this phrasing at the beginning of, they may think I'm a snitch, but I don't care. And if any of you who understand code, street code, we often say what snitches get stitches.
That's right.
And she was saying, like, listen, I don't care if you think I'm a snitch, that because we are on the same team, I should not report. just as the other officers were standing around there, they felt that because they were on the same team with this officer, that they could not check his errant behavior. She did just that. And the defense comes in, and as we look at that, so those are three individuals that I thought were really interesting. We had a 911 dispatcher, a firefighter who was an EMT. We had an MMA fighter, and then also Genevieve. And today they had Chris Martin that was testifying, the young man that actually sold the cigarettes to him. And so I thought those were interesting perspectives. And so this is what the defense has been playing up, and this is what they were preparing. Their defense attorney, Eric Nelson, his argument is that this whole situation is more complicated than what we see, Rob. There's more to the story, and this is what they are. There is more to
point to bring up the false $20 bill.
And this is, when I looked and I talked to you all about this before, what happened before this took place really is irrelevant. Exactly. It gives us a backstory. It gives us some history. But even as we look at this, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing for the defense, but we're now seeing a more humanistic side of George Floyd. We see him before his death, even though he had a counterfeit bill. I think the guy that was taking the bill, he said he took it because he looked as though he didn't know that the bill was counterfeit. And so even when he went out to address him, because I guess there were two interactions that they went out, and even went out to address him, he said that he was like, why is this happening to me? But he was with the guy that passed it. So whether it doesn't matter. And so I think that we need to make sure, all of us that are listening, those that are watching, oftentimes what happens, we look at a reason to villainize the victim. We see this take place in rape charges, rape crimes, sexual assaults. What did they do to warrant this to happen? And then we make them responsible for the crime that happened to them. I don't agree with it as it relates to women. I don't think that women, how his man's hormones, a man's eyes, a man's inability to control his emotions, I don't think that those warrant for a woman's, it doesn't warrant for a man to treat a woman in a particular way. And I feel the same way in this particular case. It doesn't, whatever George was doing before his interaction with this police officer, Derek Chauvin, and the rest of these murderers, it has no bearing on what they did to him. And so when we look at someone said, well, if he wouldn't have been in the store, he wasn't ruthless, he wasn't acting rowdy, he wasn't out of control. And contrary to what the story initially said, he was not resisting arrest. So as we continue this conversation, and I don't want to get caught up with that, as we continue this conversation, I want to just throw out there really quick something that is very important. And what I think I'm going to do, Rob, in the future is bring Dr. Jeff Gardere, who's a great friend of ours. He's been on Straight Talk a couple of different times, one of America's foremost psychologists, and he deals with trauma. And I think I would love to have him come in, and maybe someone from a legal perspective come in and talk, and then maybe someone from a civil rights perspective talk.
Side note, Straight Talk is the show heard on our sister station at KISS 107.1. WTLZ FM, which is heard every Sunday at 6 o'clock.
That's absolutely. You continue to tell me, because I just assume that you all understand this, but you don't know. So tune into Straight Talk on KISS, WTLZ or 107.1 FM on Sundays at 6 p.m. As you know, it's right before this show. But have them come in and have some real conversation about what these things mean. And one of the things that I want to talk about before we come back and we have real dialogue, because I want to just bring up a historical perspective of trauma that is associated not only with this case. And we saw the young lady who's saying she's continually repaying and she's apologizing to George Floyd in her mind. Now, if you think about it, she was there for the entire ordeal. Her video is 9 minutes and 29 seconds long.
I'm looking at her age though, Kareem.
17.
She's so young. Her mind is still developing. If she was 30, 40, 60 years old like me, that would be different. She could handle it more, but she's going to need professional help to get through this whole thing because she did see that, and she's comparing it, I can't help George Floyd, but then what about my uncles, my fathers, my brothers, anybody I know who's a male figure in my life? I can't imagine her going through,
And so she's been struggling with this. Now, not only that, but I want to talk about, all of the conversations, because I've talked with so many of my friends who are educated elites and even pediatricians, And they were saying that they had to take this as a teaching moment for their children because their children were trying to figure out why the police killed that man on the street. And because everyone saw it, everyone was talking about it, even if you didn't see it, just to know that the police killed a man on the street, and it was done in a way that was so different. Everyone was talking about this, and so they had to take this as a moment and to go through it with their kids. This is what's going on. This is what you call police brutality, and to have these conversations with kids that are so young, but to have them to be able to see this, the trauma that is associated, police violence against racial and ethnic minorities has been researched through the lens of multiple social science disciplines, including psychology. And that's why I was talking about my buddy, Dr. Jeff. But within psychology, the study of trauma lends itself to an understanding the dynamics of unjustified violence perpetuated by some law enforcement agents. These acts of aggression are not only examples of interpersonal trauma, but also the trauma of racism, which examined through the lens of intergenerational trauma, racist incident-based trauma, and complex trauma. What we're talking about is that when these types of incidents take place, that we have to understand that it is not just the trauma of that moment. It is not just the fact that in this particular situation, we saw George Floyd die by having a police officer's knee on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. It's not that trauma, just only that trauma, but it is the trauma that is compounded. It is the trauma that that child may experience in his school, through the relationship or through some type of bias that he may experience by his teacher. It is the trauma that that child may experience when he goes down to the swimming pool. And I've had this happen to me as a kid, and they were like, to make sure you take a shower before you get in there, because we don't want your oily hair in the pool.
Oh, wow.
This was said to me before as a kid.
I've heard that too.
So and I'm just sitting there like, the reality of the situation is my hair is dry by nature. I have to put natural juices and berries, oils on my hair because it is naturally dry. And most Caucasoids or Caucasians' hair tends to be oily, and they have to strip it of those oils. That's why we can't go around using Prel and other products, but we have to use products that are consistent with our hair type. But that's something that I heard as a kid growing up. When I was a kid, we were over at Anderson Water Park, and I'm dating myself. I'm in my mid to upper 40s. But when I went to Rob, please pull it together here. When I was at Anderson Water Park, which is a water park, it was a city water park that was over off of 40 Drive, across from the YMCA. And we would go there, and I remember, like, make sure you take a shower. Even at the YMCA, make sure you take a shower because we don't want all of that oil in your hair in the pool. And I sat there and I'm like, I took a shower. I took a shower this morning. I took a shower every single day. That's what chlorine is for, so that those, to kill off those things. But these are the additional traumas that we experience, and people don't understand why, Rob, this particular situation with George Floyd is so big and why the world reacted the way that it did. It's not just because of this particular George Floyd situation, but there is this continual history of violence against Black folk, and it becomes the cumulative effect of what we've experienced over time that begins to degrade our moral fiber and challenge us as individuals. And Rob, you're a few years older than I am, since you're laughing about my age.
But I look younger.
But as you okay, but as you look at this, what would you say is the thing that was most horrific to you when you look at the case of the George that we're now looking at with George Floyd? What was the thing that caught you the most by this?
The people around it watching the whole thing couldn't do anything about it. That's what that struck me, because I said, I wish I was there. I wish I was as vocal and outspoken, because at least they were trying to do something. They knew they couldn't do much because of the police there, but they were doing something by their voices and by shouting to the police officers, you were doing something wrong here. I thought that was heroic, because it takes a lot of bravery to do that.
But I'll tell you this, and you hit the nail. You said it. We didn't have this conversation before, no. But you hit the nail on the head exactly with what I was thinking as we were talking about generational trauma, and that's a real thing. That trauma is passed down from generation to generation. Black people have been told for decades where our place was. stay in your place when it comes to law enforcement. And this is why we talk about, you have to look at things from a historical perspective, and everything can't just be looked at the situation in and of itself. But when we take a look at this particular situation, and we look at how Blacks' interactions with police officers and law enforcement officers have been over the years, when we look at just months before this, we were looking at the fact that they had the right to go in and to shoot Breonna Taylor while she was in our home. This is all the same year. This is just months before that she was able to be in her own home and she's able to be shot and nothing happened to her. We give you some dollars.
Marbury's case happened the same year.
Marbury's case, Ahmaud Marbury, that he is able to be stalked down like an animal and shot in a community in which he was. And what were they doing? What was he doing in the house? Once again, they try to use and make us the perpetrators of some crime, when the actuality is that we are the victims, and our victimization should not be brought about by any other thing that causes us to have to say, well, this is why this happened to you. But we have seen this historically, from the ending of slavery to the beginning of the Jim Crow laws and the militarization of police officers. This has been the reality of Black folk here in America. We have continually had to deal with disparate treatment as it relates to law enforcement. The police were militarized once we were set free to put us back in our place. And so when you went back to that and we look at this video, many people are like, why weren't they doing anything? Why weren't they out there fighting? I would have jumped in the streets. And I've said this a million times. But the reality of it is that Black folks have learned their place. We have learned, based upon our interaction with police officers, that if you jump in and you interject, you very well could have been the person who was lying dead in a pool of blood on the street. And what they would have said was that you were interfering with the actions of a police officer, and then you were resisting arrest, and you were violent. And even the defense now is trying to say that they were distracted from giving the care to George Floyd that was necessary because of the crowd that existed.
She was white, though.
Yeah, she was a white woman that said that, but she said she had to call the police on the police, and I thought this was profound. But when we look at this, though, they're saying now that it was the crowd. The crowd was, what made them so concerned, because the crowd was growing, that they couldn't care for him because they were concerned that a riot was going to exist. Get your knee off his neck. Hello, newsflash. If you get your knee off his neck, you won't have to worry. The crowd was simply trying to say, treat him as a human and not as a dog. Okay. So if we were able to stop that senseless murder from taking place, we would have not have to worry about the outcome that would have taken place after that situation occurred. So I wanted to say this regarding this. So the Black people were standing on the street. If you remember, there was, I think it was an Asian young man who was related to the owner of the store, Cup Foods. And that Asian man he stepped off the curb. Asians aren't in many situations when dealing with America in certain sectors, they don't get treated much better than we do. We've seen that with this last administration. But the Asian man stepped off. He said, listen, you can check he said he can't breathe. Stop, get your knee off his neck. And you see the police officer shove him back onto the curb. There's two different instances because they're bullies. And for so long, they've been given a badge, and they've been given a gun, and they've been given license to do whatever they want. And I'm not saying every police officer, because I come from a long line of police officers, and I'm not going to sit there and say there's good ones. This is errant police officers. And so now they're trying to say that he was doing what he was trained to do. What you were trained to do, Officer Chauvin, and anyone else who's out there, if you're a police officer and listen, you were trained supposedly to protect and to serve. And when your job moves outside the lines of doing what you were paid by those law-abiding citizens to do, which is to protect and to serve, you are no longer fulfilling the requirements and the responsibilities that you've been hired to do. And so we are now dealing with this case. And I think that this is so important because we remember the situation with Rodney King, which was decades ago, but it screams of a similar sentiment. So I want all of you to stay tuned. Let's lean in. Let's hope that America gets it right for the first time here. It's been a hard time. It's been a long time coming. As it was Sam Cooke that said it, but change is going to come. I thank you guys for tuning in to today's edition of Straight Talk. I look forward to more conversations with you in the future. I long for a day where there's no longer black and white, but there is really united shades of gray. You all have an amazing time. God bless you. Take care of yourselves and each other. Grace and peace.